A Small Town Do-Over. Book 10, Love in Harmony Valley. By Melinda Curtis. Chapter 1. Claudia Giordano had a pedigree. And she wasn't even a poodle. Generations of Giordanos were masters in the kitchen, renowned for their exclusive clientele. Uncle Guido's restaurant in Chicago's Little Italy was rumored to have served Al Capone pasta Vesuvio. Claudia's parents had once plated eggplant parmigiana for A-list celebrities at their restaurant in Malibu. Nana Blanca had once served deep dish pizza to a presidential candidate. And Claudia? She'd served a food critic spaghetti Locurcio at a restaurant in Napa. The simpleton hadn't realized the difference between al dente and a la carte. He'd sent the plate back and she'd sent him a piece of her mind. Unfortunately, he collected followers like a brand new chef collected recipes. His negative review cost Claudia her job and her job prospects. Claudia pushed her wheelchair-bound grandmother down Harmony Valley's Main Street's brick sidewalk feeling like she'd hit rock bottom and then been flung on the rocks, again and again, until the only place she could crawl to recover was Siberia. Or the backcountry town of Harmony Valley. She hadn't visited Harmony Valley in more than a decade, but everything looked exactly the same. Quaint old buildings, quaint town square, and the quaint smell of fresh air because with a population of less than 100, and most of those octogenarians, rush hour wasn't much of a rush. So you lost your job. Nana tightened the knot of the Italian flag scarf covering her drugstore, ink-black hair. Big deal. Why do you want to cook someone else's food? Because the pay is good. And her rent was high. I pay you good. At 82, Nana had decided retirement was for the dead, and reopened her pizzeria. A fall 2 weeks ago had broken her hip, but not her spirit. When she'd heard about Claudia's disgrace, she'd immediately called and offered her minimum wage. Part-time. So much for pedigree. With the stench of a bad review tainting her reputation, it was either become a part-time pizza cook or declare bankruptcy. Claudia had arrived yesterday. Wave to the Diaz boy. Nana's voice was as thick as freshly made tomato paste as she unlocked the pizzeria's front door. It pays to be friendly to the competition. Claudia raised her hand toward the man sweeping the outdoor dining patio across the road. The man, tall, lean, and heart-attack handsome, had a perfect smile formed by perfect lips. Lips Claudia still remembered kissing. Breathe, girl. It's not the end of the world. But it might just as well have been. Claudia wasn't wearing a manslaying dress with killer heels. She didn't have a killer job at a to-die-for restaurant. And that man wasn't looking at her in faded track pants and a baggy hoodie and wanting to expire from did not call regret. Heaven forbid he came over to say hi and got a whiff of the garlic-laden frittata she'd had for breakfast. She hurried to open the door and push Nana inside. And then she stopped because this was a colossal mistake in a series of colossal mistakes. Nana's restaurant looked like a cheap dive that served pizza by the slice just off a college campus. Yellow plastic chairs and red formica tables on a dull black linoleum floor. A soda dispenser broke up the monotony of dingy white walls. But the ultimate chef's horror sat in plain sight on the counter, a microwave. Claudia felt ill, and it wasn't from her frittata. You sold food here? Successfully? This restaurant supported your father as a child. Nana spun her wheelchair to face Claudia, bumping her shins with the leg rest. You think it ruins the Giordano family name? Nana kept coming, backing Claudia against the wall. You think I don't know how to run a restaurant? Claudia refused to disrespect Nana's feelings anymore, but everywhere she looked there was something every chef, even fallen ones, found distasteful, demeaning, or demoralizing. She even tried looking out the window. But there was Enzo Diaz, gorgeous as ever, leaning on his broom and smiling, that perfect smile. Lorenzo Diaz finished sweeping the outside dining area of El Rosal, wearing a smile that felt as foolish as he'd been 12 years ago. His grandfather poked his grizzled head out the front door. Felipe wore the restaurant's standard uniform, black slacks, white shirt, and black tennis shoes, his orthopedic. Who was that pushing Blanca? There was no keeping secrets in Harmony Valley. Or from his family. Her granddaughter. From afar, Claudia was still the same dark-haired beauty that had mesmerized him at 15. That's bad. Very bad. Why? Enzo followed his grandpa into the restaurant. With salsa music playing and the sun slanting onto the rainbow-colored tables, chairs, and mosaic tiles, Enzo felt like dancing with someone. And he knew just who he wanted to dance with. Claudia. How often did life hand you a do-over? We have a monopoly in town. Grandpa trundled next to him with a rolling gait. Business has been up since Blanca broke her hip and closed. That might have been an overstatement. And we have many mouths to feed. His grandmother Myra stood in the kitchen doorway, not one salt and pepper hair out of place. She was short and squat, and looked like an unsmiling Buddha wearing a black apron with a white dishcloth draped over one shoulder. Thoughts of dancing and holding a woman close evaporated. The pizza business isn't enough to break us. Overstaffing was. Recently, Grandma had hired 2 of Enzo's cousins and 1 of his younger sisters. Enzo cooked the food and balanced the books. He knew they couldn't afford so many workers, but Grandma had the final say. Blanca only serves lunch. El Rosal served breakfast, lunch, and dinner, plus had the only bar and small convenience store in a remote country town without a grocery. The Giordanos are chefs. Grandma's voice was as tight and territorial as a terrier tied up on a cozy terrace. She and Blanca had been in competition for decades. What if she's here to make Blanca's place into something more? Chefs make white tablecloth food. Frustration put an answering growl in Enzo's voice. Every time I want to update the menu, you say Harmony Valley doesn't want white tablecloth food. This is true. Grandpa sat on a blue bar stool. Myra resists change like a snail resists a speeding ticket. Grandma rolled her eyes. The winery has a tasting room now. Visitors will come and want white tablecloth food over our traditional menu. We must know what Blanca has planned. Enzo pounded broom bristles on tile. He'd never be allowed to contribute more than mole tacos and citrus shrimp salsa to the menu. If it worries you, why don't you go over and ask Claudia? We can't do that. Grandma's peppery brows trembled. Blanca will think we're spying on her. You are. Enzo pounded the broom bristles once more. You go. Grandpa took the broom from Enzo. Ask them if they will remain open only for lunch and only serve pizza. An excuse to fraternize with the enemy? Enzo almost smiled, almost forgot the frustrating position he was in with the family, caught between tradition, obligation, and ambition. Why won't Blanca think I'm a spy? Because her granddaughter is a beautiful woman. Grandpa salsaed with the broom. She will think you will take one look at her and fall in love. Grandma laughed as Grandpa set the broom aside and took her into his arms. But of course, you are not in love with her. Grandpa spun her around the room. Because you are a spy. Chapter 2. Nana, has the refrigerator been cleaned since your fall? Clean the fridge? Sitting in her wheelchair in the kitchen doorway, Claudia's grandmother managed to look both indignant and ashamed. I didn't even clean my toilet. Claudia studied the restaurant's small galley kitchen once more. This time with spirit sinking, reality-induced trepidation. No tomatoes. No garlic. No fresh herbs. No eggs. No yeast. No flour. Nothing but generic cans of tomato paste. I don't use fresh tomatoes anymore. Nana undid her scarf, freeing her flattened coal-black hair, which contrasted against her powdered and painted face in a way that made her look like an Italian geisha. Claudia opened the freezer and murmured, blasphemy. She tossed the contents into the trash. Hey! Frozen pizza dough has come a long way. Nana's face colored as red as the 2 streaks of makeup on her cheeks. You try making pizza when you're my age. You'll take shortcuts, too. Never. Claudia would never be the black sheep of the Giordano family again. Let me tell you something about old people. Nana leaned forward in the wheelchair as if imparting an important secret. They can't tell the difference between fresh and canned. Canned. Bad word, bad word, bad word. Claudia bit her lower lip. Where's your Giordano pride? Nana sat back, red-painted lips pouting in wrinkled defiance. I must have left it in my other purse. The bell over the front door chimed. From the kitchen, Claudia couldn't see who'd entered. It's the competition. Nana glanced over her shoulder and whispered, Don't spill any of our plans. We have no plans, Claudia whispered back. Enzo appeared behind Nana, filling the room with his dark hair, dark eyes, and dark memories. Claudia's fingers curled into fists. It was a good thing all the knives were put away. Blanca, good to see you up and around. There was an intense rumble to Enzo's voice that was dangerous, much like a speeding train headed toward a sharp curve. Does this mean you want me to stop bringing you dinner? Beans and rice? Nana scoffed. Gruel for prisoners. You could have stopped days ago. I brought you more than beans and rice. The speeding train slowed down. He leaned over the wheelchair so Nana could see his angelic face. I brought you flautas and flowers. Nana smiled coyly and waved her scarf at him, clearly charmed. He can't be nice. Claudia turned away. He can't be a gentleman. Claudia smoothed her hands down her thighs as if smoothing an apron. But there was no apron, no gourmet kitchen, no staff ready to jump at her command. There was only a dated dining room, a dated business, and a never-to-be-dated dream man. It was long past time Claudia took control of the sinking ship that was her life. She spun around and introduced herself to Enzo as if they'd never met. As if he'd never pressed his lips to hers, whispered sweet nothings in her ear, stolen home, and promised to call her the next day. Her introduction did the trick. There was tension in Enzo's eyes, not temptation. A bolt of triumph pierced her. Are you looking for work? Claudia smiled sweetly. We could use a pizza cook. No, I. He brushed a hand through his thick hair. I work at El Rosal. Claudia didn't dare look at Nana lest she lose hold of her falsified sweetness. As a busboy? No. As the manager, he said slowly, studying her as if looking for some indication that she remembered him. And a cook, he added almost absently. There was a prima donna lurking in every classically trained chef. Claudia was no different. In her world, cook and chef were two very different things. And you serve standard Mexican fare? She paused for his nod. That is so filling. The put-down tasted bitter and sweet. Unlike her, but long overdue. Beans and rice. Nana nodded, adding innocently, filling. Claudia should have left it at that. But Enzo had broken her heart when she was 15 and had pounded in her chest at the chance for payback. Are any of your kitchen staff classically trained? He shook his head, his eyes narrowing defensively. But, like your family, we have generations of experience in the kitchen. More than what's needed to make a pizza, especially pepperoni, which is Blanca's best seller. By the slice. Claudia forced herself to laugh, forced her words to fling down the gauntlet. The days of simple sliced pepperoni are over. This is a new beginning. We may even serve dinner. Without beans and rice. Nana looked suitably snooty. I hope you come up with a low-sodium pepperoni option, Enzo said with enough fire to broil a steak. You'll need it in this town. He stomped out. What are you doing? Nana whispered after Enzo left, although there was no need to whisper. I'm not going to serve dinner. Lunch exhausts me. He put down your pizza. Nana scoffed. A few minutes ago, you put down my pizza. That was different. This was war. Claudia had forgotten him. Enzo couldn't escape her presence fast enough. Forget that she'd only been in town for one weekend a dozen years ago and that he'd lost her number. She'd forgotten him. As if that weren't enough of a blow to his manhood, she'd put down the food of his culture and his skill in the kitchen. Anger chopped the air in Enzo's lungs into thin, shallow bits. It chopped his steps until they felt stiff and stilted. It chopped his ego until his pride littered the street like breadcrumbs. Come, come. His grandmother called him to the kitchen where the salsa music in the front also played on speakers. Sit, sit. She chased cousin Arturo out of a chair with a dish towel. The family lined the wall by Enzo's office. 7 cousins. His 2 younger sisters. Uncle Hector. Aunt Aurelie. His parents, who used to manage the restaurant for his grandmother until Enzo became the head cook 5 years ago. Sit. Grandma pressed his shoulders down. And tell us their plans. They're going to reopen. That's all. Enzo wasn't sure if he believed Claudia when she said they were considering opening for dinner and expanding the menu. He wasn't sure if he believed Claudia when she said she didn't remember him. Wishful thinking all around. No. Grandma paced, her sneakers as squawky as her voice. There must be more. Blanca has resented our success for years. It's a friendly competition, Grandpa said, earning him a frown from his wife. A chef won't settle for making pizza. Grandma stared at each family member in turn, waiting for head nods. She'll want a challenge. And we will give her one. How can we change our menu? Enzo perked up at this. Cooking was his passion and their menu bored him. We can lighten up our cuisine and add some items that are hot. Cuisine. Grandma scoffed. Such a fancy word for food. I'll tell you what's hot, Arturo said, grinning. Blanca's granddaughter. Grandma swiped Arturo in the back of the head with her dish towel. Show some respect. Enzo's cousin rubbed his shaved head. I only meant that if Enzo couldn't pry out her secrets, I wouldn't mind trying. Mine, Enzo's heart growled, despite the passing of years and the mistakes he'd made. Off limits, Enzo's brain warned. Claudia thought he was beneath her. No one needs to do anything, Enzo said in a voice that sounded calmer than he felt. Claudia is making pizza the same way that Blanca's been making pizza, with canned sauce and frozen dough. Whether this was the truth or not. Why worry the family? Grandma peered at Enzo thoughtfully. Claudia. What about her? You knew her name was Claudia before you crossed the street this morning. The buzzer over the front door went off. The lunch business had begun. The family moved to their stations. Everyone except Grandma and Enzo, who stared at each other. You will choose family, Grandma said, turning away to prepare trays of chips and salsa. Over what? A woman? His dreams of being a chef? Of owning his own restaurant? He'd always choose family. Wouldn't he? How do you manage supplies, Nana? The cupboards were bare of everything except mismatched paper plates, paper placemats with a map of Italy and mismatched plastic utensils. I go to the grocery store that has tomato sauce on sale. It saves me money. Her grandmother. So proud. Claudia sighed. Nana probably didn't calculate her gas or her time into the cost of buying supplies. Laughter drifted from across the road. Claudia resisted going to the window to look in case Enzo was watching. He'd grown in 12 years. His shoulders were wider, his chin firmer. He looked like an angel until he grinned. And then the devil came to town. She'd come to Harmony Valley during the fall festival 12 years ago. A rare trip since her parents were workaholics. Back before the grain mill exploded and destroyed Harmony Valley's economy, they'd held dances in the town square after fairs and festivals. During one visit, Claudia had worked the fall festival pizza booth all afternoon and evening, and watched a tall, dark-haired boy working El Rosal's taco booth. Later that night, the town square was lit with colorful paper lanterns and laughter. A band played. Couples danced. Nana had encouraged her to mingle, but the teenagers all knew each other. Claudia had hidden behind the oak tree where Grandpa had proposed to Nana, trying to avoid embarrassment. Not succeeding. Enzo appeared out of the shadows, still dressed in his black serving slacks and white button-down. What's that in your hand? He was word-stealing, curfew-breaking handsome. Claudia froze. Boys like him didn't give girls like her the time of day unless they wanted help passing algebra. Enzo moved closer. What's in your hand, pizza girl? Her chin came up. She wasn't a pizza girl. She was a chef in training. You know what it is. It was tradition during those dances that a woman carry a sweet in a small bag and give it to her sweetheart after a dance. Nana had forced her to take Italian wedding cookies in a drawstring bag of red satin. Don't shoot. He held up his hands. I'm Enzo. I'm just here to talk. He wasn't going to ask her to dance and probably didn't care if he passed algebra. Disappointment flambéed her veins and then died out, leaving her cold. He'd probably been sent over by his grandmother, who knew her grandmother. Their restaurants were 100 feet apart, and although they had a history of competing with each other, it would be just like Nana to try and make sure Claudia had a good time. Everybody knows each other here, she said, lifting her chin. Pity party. Table for one in the way back. He'd moved to the rim of the shadows. The lantern light glinted off his dark hair, his angelic face. The kids from school are tight. But not with you, she realized. She hadn't seen any teens hanging out at his booth. He shrugged, but it wasn't an uncaring expression. He felt left out. I work all the time in my family's restaurant. Me, too. Her words came out low. Lonely. Sometimes I think I prefer working there too much. A hint of that smile caught the light. More than being with kids my age. Me, too. Her words came out lower. Lonelier. Could I be any more pathetic? Claudia could. She blurted, I want to be a chef. Me, too. He took a few steps back in the shadows and held out his hand. Magnetized, she'd followed, because she'd never met anyone her age who shared her dream. Laughter across the street brought Claudia back to the present. They hadn't danced. And Enzo hadn't called the next day. She never should have given Enzo her bag of sweets. Chapter 4. Enzo thought about Claudia's smile as he chopped cilantro. He thought about Claudia's deep brown eyes as he diced tomatoes. He thought about Claudia's snappy humor as he shredded chicken from the grill. And whenever he thought of her, he thought of kisses stolen beneath the stars, a promise broken, and how he wanted to please the daughter of famous chefs in every way. You're too quiet today, Enzo. His grandmother stirred chicken in a pot. Her white dish towel hung from her shoulder. Grandpa took a pan of baked tortilla chips from the oven. He's worried about the business we will lose now that Blanca's has reopened. We barely lose any business from her, Enzo said firmly. A statement that was usually the truth, but today it seemed half the town had stopped by Blanca's for a slice of pizza, because half El Rosal's lunch business hadn't materialized. Grandma covered the pot. She's going to ruin us, you're Claudia. He ignored her reference to Claudia. She wasn't his, and that was a shame. We've weathered worse storms. The near demise of the town. It was one of the reasons they diversified, remodeling part of their lobby into a small convenience store after the local grocery store closed. Arturo washed dishes at the sink. Maybe we should make pizza. Enzo scoffed. Mexican pizza, Arturo clarified. That gave Enzo pause. Mexican pizza. It could be awesome. Grandma came to see what Enzo was doing. Who's that order for? Me. I have an appointment. He plated mole tacos, a side of beans, rice, and salsa, and topped it all with a few of Grandpa's warm, homemade tortilla chips. And then he covered it with foil. Grandma gave him the evil eye. She knew who his appointment was with. But she said nothing. Yet. Enzo hung his apron on his office door, headed for the door, and took the covered plate with him. You can't fool me. Grandma twirled her dish towel. You're taking that to her. Claudia. Except for the overplayed salsa music, the kitchen went silent. Everyone's attention turned toward Enzo and Grandma. "I'm going to taste her pizza," Enzo said with a straight face. There was no sense in lying. The town and the Diaz family had eyes and ears the CA envied. "Way to take one for the team." Arturo smiled, giving Enzo 2 thumbs up. "Idiot." Grandma snapped her dish towel at Arturo's butt. She turned toward Enzo, looking less like the iron woman who'd run El Rosal for 60 years and more like the caring grandmother of his youth. "Don't let her put your cooking down." "I won't." Enzo pushed open the back door. "Enzo." She followed him, snapping at him half-heartedly with her dish towel. "Remember. You're a spy, not her Latin lover." "I'd rather be a chef." The words were wrenched out of him, brittle with the weight of truth. "Grandma's scared. That is something she cannot give you." Enzo hoped Grandma was wrong. Claudia was more nervous than when she'd seen the food critic in her restaurant 2 months ago. Why was she putting so much importance on this? Enzo had charmed her once and cast her aside like an order of bad fish. His grin still had the power to weaken her common sense. She should have been Chef Claudia, preparing to put the lowly, heartless cook in his place. Instead, she was Claudia the woman, checking her appearance in the bathroom mirror every 10 minutes. The bell above the front door rang as she plated her dish for Enzo. She couldn't see who came in. "Black tablecloths?" Enzo's voice filled the empty restaurant with warmth and humor. "Did the fast food colors get to you?" "Yes." She brought the plate of food to the dining room and tried to ignore the way seeing him made her want to fall into his arms. Falling led to broken things. "Just ask Nana." "This place looks different," he said, nodding approvingly. She'd changed the restaurant a lot in a few days. She'd brought out the real dishes, cutlery, and cloth napkins. She'd hung framed magazine covers featuring the Giordano family on the walls. The microwave had been retired to the kitchen. "Who is that?" Enzo gestured toward a bust at the counter. "It's a copy of the top half of the statue of David. Her good luck charm. I bought him and the beret he wears when I attended a cooking class in Paris." She brought David to every kitchen she cooked in. "What do you think? It looks legit." His gaze seemed hungry, and he hadn't even looked at her food. Claudia's cheeks heated. "Shall we?" He nodded. They sat and exchanged plates. He took a bite of pizza. "The sauce tastes like fresh tomatoes." She took a bite of taco, fully expecting to be disappointed. "The mole is." He looked worried at her hesitation. The hurt from the past urged her to put him in his place. But the mole was light, rich, and flavorful. "It's exquisite." Who knew she'd ever use that word to describe mole? Enzo's smile was more like a boy opening presents on Christmas than a man trying to prove he could cook. She tried his beans. He tried her pasta. She had to admit his dish was just as flavorful as her orecchiette with ricotta. It was hard to hold on to hurt when enjoying such good food. "Try the rice." How could a grin that teased for a kiss be so full of unadulterated joy? She didn't know. She didn't care. She pointed at his plate. "The caprese." Rice and caprese salad could be boring. Neither were. She'd made certain of it. He speared a slice of tomato and mozzarella, and then speared a piece of chicken from her mole taco. "What are you doing?" "What I love most. Experimenting with flavors." He chewed slowly and then swallowed. "The Italian seasoning gives the sweet mole a kick." "Wow." He loaded his fork again, this time extending it across to her. "Try it." She hesitated. The combination intrigued, but that fork had been in his mouth. And that mouth was already intriguing enough. "What are you afraid of?" He moved the fork closer. She was afraid he was just as magnetic as he'd been 12 years ago. She was only here for a few weeks, and then she hoped to have a job. A real job. And real jobs never landed close to people she cared about. "Be brave, pizza girl." It's only a bite. The deep voice. That mischievous smile. Claudia leaned forward, opened her mouth, and accepted the food that should have been bitter on her tongue, flavors fighting each other. But, oh my. They blended beautifully. Her eyes drifted closed, so she could let the flavors do their thing. Claudia? His deep voice softened. This may sound like I'm rushing things, but... Her eyes flew open. Was Enzo going to ask her out? Would you cook with me? He said instead. Relief and disappointment cascaded together in her laughter. His smile dimmed. What's so funny? Nothing. She stood to get them something to drink. You thought I was going to ask you for a kiss? Her cheeks flamed so hot her lips were heat-sealed, pressed together to keep her from saying something she'd regret. Enzo caught her hand. I didn't ask for a kiss back then. I won't do so now. Instead, Enzo tugged her into his lap and kissed her. And just like 12 years ago, she didn't argue. Chapter 5. When Enzo was 15, he'd seen the most amazing girl serving food at the fall festival with her grandparents. She wasn't like the other girls in town. Oh, they were pretty enough, and he supposed they dressed fashionably. But Claudia had a sophistication they lacked. In the way she stood. In the way she walked. In the way she talked to adults who came to her grandparents' booth. She was like him, entrenched in a large family, interested in cooking, mature beyond her years from working in the family business. Enzo was smitten. He hadn't found time to approach her until the dance that night. He'd meant to ask her to dance, to ask for her number, to ask for a parting kiss. Instead, he'd drawn her into the shadows and kissed her against a parked car until they were both breathless and reckless. She made him breathless now. And they weren't in the shadows. They were in full view of whoever drove past on Main Street. Or whoever stood on the south corner of El Rosal's outdoor dining area. He didn't care. Let them see. Let them know. Claudia is mine. He drew Claudia closer and deepened the kiss. A horn honked. Claudia tensed. Drew back. Frowned. At him. Don't. He ran a thumb over her forehead, smoothing the crease between her slender brows. Don't. She got to her feet, but Enzo still held her hand and she didn't break free. History will not repeat itself. That much is certain. This time he wasn't letting Claudia go. We talked about our dreams that night, Enzo. So similar, he murmured. Although she had achieved more than he ever could. The white chef coat she wore proved it. I gave you my number and you lost it. He shrugged, trying simultaneously to look cool and sincere, but afraid he failed at both. Oh, don't be a cliché. Claudia pulled her hand away and headed toward the kitchen. You want to know the truth. Enzo followed her. Your number was in my pants pocket, and my mother gathered my dirty clothes while I was sleeping. It came out as a wad of paper. Claudia huffed, back to him, arms crossed. You're at risk of losing your man card, Enzo. You could have called my grandparents and asked for my number. Could I have? He caught Claudia by the shoulders and turned her around. He stared down into those dark, honest eyes as he cupped her cheek. And then he moved his palm to her temple. I need to make sure you're not feverish. She blew out a breath as if she'd been holding it too long. Why? You know our grandmothers? They're competitive. Your grandmother would have slammed the door in my face, and then called my grandmother, which would have started World War III. The verdict is in. Claudia removed his hand from her forehead. Your man card was washed away with my phone number. Enzo opened his mouth to argue, but she was right. Okay. I lost my man card when I was 15. But with your help, I think I can get it back. He smiled at her, letting her see his heart in his eyes. Claudia tilted her head, not shying away from that gaze. And then she laughed, as if something inside of her was freed by his honesty. The lighthearted sound filled Enzo's heart. Claudia liked his cooking. She liked his kiss. Enzo captured her fingers, gently pressing his lips against the back of her hand. I won't steal another kiss from those tempting lips of yours until I've proven myself as a man worthy of her affection and worthy of a place next to her in the kitchen. Enzo, you. Claudia straightened, staring at their joined hands with a look that made him worry. You hurt me back then. Her admission roiled in his stomach. I was young and stupid. I thought you'd come back. Enzo smiled. When he was near her, he felt like smiling all the time. And you did. 12 years later. She freed her hand and brought out her stern voice, the one she'd used on him the first time he tried to talk to her. I meant what I said about history. I'm leaving in 4 weeks. There's nothing for me here. You're wrong, pizza girl. He moved past her, deeper into the galley kitchen. A chef's kitchen. He'd never been inside one before. There is something here for you, don't you see? Together we can be groundbreaking. Or heartbreaking. If he wasn't careful. You can't just take chicken suiza, pour it over pasta, and call it Mexican-Italian cuisine. Claudia finished draining the steaming ziti into a colander. How could it be that an hour ago Enzo had kissed her and now they were bickering like work colleagues? After she'd agreed to cook with him, Enzo had made a quick trip to El Rosal and brought back traditional Mexican ingredients. They'd been bickering and laughing ever since. All right, pizza girl. Enzo took a step back, deferring to Claudia. If you were making a pasta dish with white sauce, what would you add? That was easier to answer than her reason for cooking with him. Parmesan. Breadcrumbs. Parsley or basil. She rolled up the sleeves of her chef's jacket. Let's try that. Enzo took her ziti, added his shredded chicken, milk, flour, sour cream, green chilies, and a Mexican blend of cheese. That's my contribution. Now you. Parmesan, breadcrumbs, and parsley it is. Enzo leaned over her shoulder as she added Italian flavors, so close she could smell the grilled chicken he'd made earlier. He watched everything she did closely, but never touched her inappropriately. He was keeping his promise. No more kisses. It shouldn't have been disappointing. It was. When she was finished combining the ingredients, Enzo slid the pan into the oven and grinned. I think we should try another dish. She wasn't sure that was a good idea. We should clean up. His smile fell. Instantly, Claudia felt bad. You really love to cook, don't you? The smile returned. Enzo began filling the sink with water to wash the dishes. He could cook, clean, and kiss. He was every woman's dream. And that was the problem. Dreams disappeared come morning. When things go right in the kitchen, he said in a prosaic voice. Things go right everywhere. That sounds like it should be on an apron. Claudia picked up a tea towel, ready to dry dishes. Think about it. When you cook for someone, you're fueling a body with food. Enzo didn't just grin. It was as if his joy in cooking and in life itself radiated from him in a full-body smile. When was the last time Claudia had felt such enthusiasm in her work? She couldn't remember. Enzo glanced down at her, his warm gaze inviting her to share in his joy. But if you can feed them and delight their senses, then you can fuel their soul as well. In her drive to run a kitchen and be the best, Claudia had lost the soul of cooking, not that she'd realized it until just now. She envied Enzo. So the menu at El Rosal reflects this philosophy of yours? His hand stilled in the soapy water. My grandmother insists upon offering traditional food. I have a few things on the menu, like the mold tacos, but it's frustrating, isn't it? Being passionate about cooking great food and having to cook what the owners want. If she'd had her choice, she would never have put spaghetti lo curcio on the menu. I wish I had the money to open my own place. She expected him to chime in and agree. He was too quiet. Too still. There was no smile. His infectious joie de vivre had disappeared. Enzo? What had she said wrong? I can't ever leave the family business. They all rely on me. He had the soul of a chef. And he was stuck in Harmony Valley. It saddened her. I'm sorry. You shouldn't be. The words were stiff with determination, as if Enzo was trying to convince himself. I'm happy. But perhaps not joyful. Chapter 5. When Enzo was 15, he'd seen the most amazing girl serving food at the fall festival with her grandparents. She wasn't like the other girls in town. Oh, they were pretty enough, and he supposed they dressed fashionably. But Claudia had a sophistication they lacked. In the way she stood. In the way she walked. In the way she talked to adults who came to her grandparents' booth. She was like him, entrenched in a large family, interested in cooking, mature beyond her years from working in the family business. Enzo was smitten. He hadn't found time to approach her until the dance that night. He'd meant to ask her to dance, to ask for her number, to ask for a parting kiss. Instead, he'd drawn her into the shadows and kissed her against a parked car until they were both breathless and reckless. She made him breathless now. And they weren't in the shadows. They were in full view of whoever drove past on Main Street. Or whoever stood on the south corner of El Rosal's outdoor dining area. He didn't care. Let them see. Let them know. Claudia is mine. He drew Claudia closer and deepened the kiss. A horn honked. Claudia tensed. Drew back. Frowned. At him. Don't. He ran a thumb over her forehead, smoothing the crease between her slender brows. Don't. She got to her feet, but Enzo still held her hand and she didn't break free. History will not repeat itself. That much is certain. This time he wasn't letting Claudia go. We talked about our dreams that night, Enzo. So similar, he murmured. Although she had achieved more than he ever could. The white chef coat she wore proved it. I gave you my number and you lost it. He shrugged, trying simultaneously to look cool and sincere, but afraid he failed at both. Oh, don't be a cliché. Claudia pulled her hand away and headed toward the kitchen. You want to know the truth. Enzo followed her. Your number was in my pants pocket, and my mother gathered my dirty clothes while I was sleeping. It came out as a wad of paper. Claudia huffed, back to him, arms crossed. You're at risk of losing your man card, Enzo. You could have called my grandparents and asked for my number. Could I have? He caught Claudia by the shoulders and turned her around. He stared down into those dark, honest eyes as he cupped her cheek. And then he moved his palm to her temple. I need to make sure you're not feverish. She blew out a breath as if she'd been holding it too long. Why? You know our grandmothers? They're competitive. Your grandmother would have slammed the door in my face and then called my grandmother, which would have started World War III. The verdict is in. Claudia removed his hand from her forehead. Your man card was washed away with my phone number. Enzo opened his mouth to argue, but she was right. Okay. I lost my man card when I was 15. But with your help, I think I can get it back. He smiled at her, letting her see his heart in his eyes. Claudia tilted her head, not shying away from that gaze. And then she laughed, as if something inside of her was freed by his honesty. The lighthearted sound filled Enzo's heart. Claudia liked his cooking. She liked his kiss. Enzo captured her fingers, gently pressing his lips against the back of her hand. I won't steal another kiss from those tempting lips of yours until I've proven myself as a man worthy of her affection and worthy of a place next to her in the kitchen. Enzo, you. Claudia straightened, staring at their joined hands with a look that made him worry. You hurt me back then. Her admission roiled in his stomach. I was young and stupid. I thought you'd come back. Enzo smiled. When he was near her, he felt like smiling all the time. And you did. 12 years later. She freed her hand and brought out her stern voice, the one she'd used on him the first time he tried to talk to her. I meant what I said about history. I'm leaving in 4 weeks. There's nothing for me here. You're wrong, pizza girl. He moved past her, deeper into the galley kitchen. A chef's kitchen. He'd never been inside one before. There is something here for you, don't you see? Together, we can be groundbreaking. Or heartbreaking. If he wasn't careful. You can't just take chicken suiza, pour it over pasta, and call it Mexican-Italian cuisine. Claudia finished draining the steaming ziti into a colander. How could it be that an hour ago Enzo had kissed her and now they were bickering like work colleagues? After she'd agreed to cook with him, Enzo had made a quick trip to El Rosal and brought back traditional Mexican ingredients. They'd been bickering and laughing ever since. All right, pizza girl. Enzo took a step back, deferring to Claudia. If you were making a pasta dish with white sauce, what would you add? That was easier to answer than her reason for cooking with him. Parmesan. Breadcrumbs. Parsley or basil. She rolled up the sleeves of her chef's jacket. Let's try that. Enzo took her ziti, added his shredded chicken, milk, flour, sour cream, green chilies, and a Mexican blend of cheese. That's my contribution. Now you. Parmesan, breadcrumbs, and parsley it is. Enzo leaned over her shoulder as she added Italian flavors, so close she could smell the grilled chicken he'd made earlier. He watched everything she did closely, but never touched her inappropriately. He was keeping his promise. No more kisses. It shouldn't have been disappointing. It was. When she was finished combining the ingredients, Enzo slid the pan into the oven and grinned. I think we should try another dish. She wasn't sure that was a good idea. We should clean up. His smile fell. Instantly, Claudia felt bad. You really love to cook, don't you? The smile returned. Enzo began filling the sink with water to wash the dishes. He could cook, clean, and kiss. He was every woman's dream. And that was the problem. Dreams disappeared come morning. When things go right in the kitchen, he said in a prosaic voice. Things go right everywhere. That sounds like it should be on an apron. Claudia picked up a tea towel, ready to dry dishes. Think about it. When you cook for someone, you're fueling a body with food. Enzo didn't just grin. It was as if his joy in cooking and in life itself radiated from him in a full-body smile. When was the last time Claudia had felt such enthusiasm in her work? She couldn't remember. Enzo glanced down at her, his warm gaze inviting her to share in his joy. But if you can feed them and delight their senses, then you can fuel their soul as well. In her drive to run a kitchen and be the best, Claudia had lost the soul of cooking, not that she'd realized it until just now. She envied Enzo. So the menu at El Rosal reflects this philosophy of yours? His hand stilled in the soapy water. My grandmother insists upon offering traditional food. I have a few things on the menu, like the mold tacos, but it's frustrating, isn't it? Being passionate about cooking great food and having to cook what the owners want. If she'd had her choice, she would never have put spaghetti lo curcio on the menu. I wish I had the money to open my own place. She expected him to chime in and agree. He was too quiet. Too still. There was no smile. His infectious joie de vivre had disappeared. Enzo? What had she said wrong? I can't ever leave the family business. They all rely on me. He had the soul of a chef. And he was stuck in Harmony Valley. It saddened her. I'm sorry. You shouldn't be. The words were stiff with determination, as if Enzo was trying to convince himself. I'm happy. But perhaps not joyful. Chapter 6. Claudia had made a combination pizza, a mushroom and corn salad, and ziti parmesan for the luncheon crowd. It was becoming increasingly difficult to stick with the traditional Italian recipes. Cooking with Enzo these past few weeks had been fun and made her brain think in new directions. She felt a renewed enthusiasm in the kitchen. The bell over the restaurant door chimed. "Enzo, you're early." Claudia hadn't finished the lunch dishes or put water on to boil. "I thought so." Myra, the Diaz matriarch, stood in the middle of the dining area, looking around with a disapproving scowl. "You and Enzo have been sneaking around behind my back. We're adults? Did that have to come out as a question?" Myra stomped forward on squeaky shoes. "You want to steal him away. You make it sound like I'm enticing Enzo to the dark side." They hadn't kissed since the first day they'd cooked together. Myra waved a fleshy arm. "I'm not as smart as you. I didn't go to school to learn how to cook. But I know my grandson. He won't want to stay once you're done with him. Again. Adults. No question this time." "Very good, Claudia." She dished up a serving of the mushroom and corn salad. "Why don't you sit down and try this? You think I'll eat your cooking and be like him? Be kind to you and look the other way when our business suffers?" Taking business away from a competitor was every chef's triumph. Yet Claudia felt no elation. She didn't want to take anything from Enzo. She set the salad and a fork on the table. "Your business is suffering?" Myra raised both hands to heaven and shook them. "Yes. And we have many mouths to feed. I'm sorry. I didn't think the traffic was any different than when my grandmother ran the place. I wish. Tomorrow I'm trying something new to get my business back." Myra sat down and stared at the salad as if it was a dose of ghastly medicine she desperately needed. "Pizza. Who would have thought it was my downfall?" With jerky movements, she filled her fork. "I have to taste this. I don't want to, but I have to." Myra swallowed, groaning. "Is something wrong?" "Yes. It's delicious. You are big trouble." She dropped the fork on the plate, blinking back tears. "People are moving back to town, including members of my family. That would explain the many mouths to feed. We have everything customers want: breakfast, lunch, and dinner." She shook a finger at Claudia. "And then you came along. I'm only here temporarily." A chef needed patrons who appreciated fine cuisine and could pay top dollar for it. She wasn't charging what she was worth. Myra paused, looking almost happy, although Claudia doubted she ever truly looked happy. And then she scowled. "You'll break Enzo's heart if you leave. We're friends. Colleagues. Liars," she thought. Moving about the kitchen with ill-disguised excuses to innocently touch each other as they worked in close quarters. But there'd been no kisses. No discussion of recovered man cards. Enzo was more interested in learning from her and making their Mexican-Italian dishes than in making her his dish. "You are everything he ever wanted to be." Myra flipped a hand in the air. "You can complete him the way no one can. Not his family, not his mother. Not me." She tapped her ample chest. "And I taught him how to cook. I'd like to go on record as saying there has been no completion. And no moves to do so, more's the pity. He's good, isn't he? My Enzo." Her face seemed to drain of color. "He could be a chef. He's incredible. And handsome and caring. And let's not forget a great kisser. 5-star. Myra wiped a tear from her cheek. "What am I going to do? He can cook better than any of us. And he understands how to do the taxes. He's not going to leave you. But he should. I made him head cook to keep him here. And for that, I am ashamed." Claudia felt the same shame. Because she hadn't told Enzo he could be something really great. If he left everything he loved behind. "Arturo, it's not bring your kid to work day." Enzo sliced bell peppers, prepping for lunch. Claudia had taught him a different cutting technique, and he wanted to master it. Myra wanted Junior here. Arturo stopped unloading the dishwasher of plates and glasses to ruffle his son's hair. I'm going to dance. Arturo Jr. began to do the hippie shake to the salsa song coming out of the speakers. He was a plump 6-year-old with hips that moved like Elvis. Dance in my office, kid. Enzo gestured toward the small room. He's going to dance outside. Myra entered the kitchen and snapped her towel playfully at her great-grandson. And then she smiled. Smiled! An expression that hadn't been seen since Claudia had arrived. Was Enzo dreaming? In a time warp? Being punked? Why is he dancing outside? I have seen those dancers waving their pizza signs in Cloverdale. Myra shimmied with Junior in a way great-grandmothers should never shimmy. Arturo is going to be our dancer and draw all sorts of customers. Now the spectacle made sense. Not that Enzo liked it. I don't think. Business is down, Enzo. Myra stopped dancing and rested a leathery palm on his cheek. We must do something. But why does it have to be something embarrassing? Enzo blurted. What would Claudia think? No true chef would attract attention to their restaurant in such a way. Hey, that's my kid you're talking about. Arturo lowered his voice and came closer. Arturo Jr. loves to dance. And you, Enzo, you love to cook. Don't be a jerk. Junior flung his body about the kitchen in time to the beat, happy as happy could be. Enzo swallowed his pride and hoped Claudia wouldn't witness Junior's performance. The Diaz family was going to be the death of his chance to earn a real chef's respect. Chapter 7. Well, I'll be. Actually, I'm not sure what I'll be, Rose said, sitting at a table by the front window of Pizza by the Slice with Mildred and Agnes, while Claudia removed chocolate from small candy molds. Is that the Diaz boy dancing on the street corner? What type of dance is it? Mildred, being legally blind, couldn't see. I used to love to dance. He's waving a sign. Agnes chuckled. I think it says $1 Taco Tuesday. Claudia had only been half listening to them from the kitchen. But anybody, dancing on the sidewalk and waving a sign was reason to leave the pot of spaghetti sauce simmering on the stove and check out the competition. Sure enough, a dynamo of a little boy was getting his groove on in front of El Rosal while waving a small sign. Since we only eat a slice of pizza here. Rose came to her feet in one smooth movement. I think we should go over and eat a taco there. Fair enough. Agnes gathered her purse. I like how you ladies think. Mildred rattled her walker as she stood. Great pizza today, Claudia. And just like that, they were gone. And the restaurant was empty. They stole our customers, Nana said when the trio left. She peered out the window. It was the end of the lunch rush anyway. Claudia was more interested in the pot of Mexican-Italian spaghetti sauce simmering on the stove. She'd wanted to surprise Enzo with her creation. Nana wheeled her chair into the kitchen, got a paper placemat and wrote on the back in marker, $1 Pizza Tuesday. There's no alliteration in that. Claudia put the dirty dishes in the sink. And you can't dance. Who says? She wheeled her way to the door but couldn't open it. A little help here. Claudia let her out and followed her outside. The winter afternoon was sunny, but nippy. Claudia hoped Nana wouldn't insist on being out here long. Aren't you supposed to be using a cane or a walker by now? I don't feel strong enough to walk around the restaurant all day. Which meant she wasn't ready to take over running it, although Claudia's 4 weeks were nearly up. This isn't necessary. It's 1 o'clock. Nap time for the many elderly Harmony Valley residents. Nana ignored her. She wheeled her way to a spot directly across from the boy, who was doing some kind of jive and singing Great Balls of Fire, complete with hip thrusts and shoulder waggles. Claudia laughed. Here was the joy she so often found while cooking with Enzo. She looked across the road, meeting Enzo's gaze, and laughed again. Hey! Nana cried, holding up her sign so the patrons on El Rosal's patio, specifically Rose, Agnes and Mildred, could see. Nana warbled her way into the chorus, rotating her upper torso in a poor imitation of Jerry Lee Lewis. The little boy stopped dancing and stared. His thatch of dark hair ruffled in the wind. Nana continued with the catchy tune and kicked out her left foot, non-hip replacement side, in time to a melody only she could hear. "Wait! Wait!" The little boy shouted, looking both ways before running across the road. He stood in front of Nana and snapped out a beat. 4, 3, 2, 1. They started the song from the beginning, both singing off-key. Claudia laughed some more. She hadn't expected to find so much joy in Harmony Valley. Across the road, Myra had her head in her hands. The 3 councilwomen sitting on the patio were chuckling. And Enzo? He was nowhere to be seen. Claudia had laughed at Junior dancing. Enzo felt small and insignificant, a snail shriveling on a hot sidewalk. But he had his pride. He showed up at Pizza by the Slice after lunch, pausing to look at the chalkboard Claudia had propped outside her door, listing the day's short menu. No plastic menus for her. He entered the restaurant. But Claudia wasn't alone. One of the winery owners was talking to her in the kitchen. It was Slade Jennings. Of the 3 men who'd started the winery, Slade was the one Enzo was least familiar with. "I hope you'll think about it." Slade smoothed a fancy tie over his chest. It was easy to eavesdrop when no salsa music played in the background. Pizza by the Slice was always church quiet. No music for them. It was easy to take in the scene and feel even more out of place. Slade wore a fancy shirt and tie, making Enzo feel underdressed in his bleached white button-down and black slacks. Making Enzo feel inadequate when compared to Claudia in her white chef's jacket. "I know things in town are still sleepy," Slade said. "But we're going to be having a grand opening at the winery this spring, and people will come intending to spend money on good wine and good food." Jealousy smashed into Enzo. Jealousy expanded and burned and combusted inside him. Over a man in Claudia's kitchen. Over a man who'd never come to Enzo to talk about business opportunities. Claudia's apologetic gaze met Enzo's. And in that moment, Enzo knew. Slade's offer didn't interest her, not the classically trained chef with a resume built in Malibu, Paris, and Napa. A chef like that would never be satisfied staying in a small town like Harmony Valley. "Let me know what you decide, Claudia." Slade left with a nod in Enzo's direction. Enzo hesitated on the dining room side of the kitchen doorway. So much jealousy. It bubbled through him like water that had come to a rapid boil. And yet his words were controlled and calm. "Slade wants you to stay." A pot simmered on the stove. The smells of tomato and chorizo filled the room. They were smells he associated with warmth and comfort. But today, he felt those aromas burn him inside. Slade says having a restaurant offering fine cuisine will help the winery draw visitors. Claudia scrubbed a pizza pan as if it hadn't been cleaned in years, her knuckles white. "But this isn't my restaurant." "No. It's not." She didn't belong here in a fast food place masquerading as a high-end cafe. Claudia cleared her throat, not looking at Enzo. "Slade wants me, Nana, to get a license to serve wine." Enzo had one of those. "Slade doesn't understand. This is just a fast food place. I mean, look at it." Enzo did. The yellow plastic chairs almost disappeared behind the classic transformation she'd made. Black tablecloths. Framed accolades. The statue of David and his beret. She'd taken boring and cheap and turned it into classy and quirky. Claudia dropped the pan into the sink, sending water sloshing onto the floor. "I'm sorry. I just want to get out of Harmony Valley, you know. To a real life." She mopped up the spill with paper towels, still not looking at him. To real food. As if what they were making together wasn't real. Enzo's stomach turned. Of course, it hadn't been real. Claudia didn't need Enzo to cook. She'd cooked without him. It was there. On the stove. His heart began to crack. Or maybe it had started shattering earlier when Junior was dancing. Back when I was a kid, I dreamed of being a chef. There was a fragile quality to Claudia's words, as if she knew this was the end of their time together and didn't know how to say it. But I never dreamed of being a chef here. I did, he said. Chapter 8. I dreamed of being a chef in my hometown. There. Enzo had never said that statement out loud before. It didn't feel like a triumphant statement. He continued anyway. I dreamed of running the kitchen my way with my cousins by my side. Now it was Enzo who couldn't look at Claudia. Instead, he stared at the bust of David beneath that blue beret. I dreamed of a wife who shared my passion for cooking, Enzo went on. He took the beret from David's stony head, staring at it without seeing the blue fabric and stitches. It reminded him of everything that was out of reach, like cooking school and trips to Paris. I dreamed of people driving hours to experience one of my meals, of critics waiting to get in, of talking with other chefs as an equal. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw Claudia turn the burner off. And then you came back to town with your opinions of beans and rice only being filling. Enzo settled the beret on his head. It didn't fit. He'd known it wouldn't. He tossed it on David's head and looked Claudia squarely in the eye. Mexican cuisine is so much more. I'm so much more. Claudia was a Giordano. He put her on a pedestal for years, a pedestal he wanted to be on. That's why he'd never manned up and asked her family for her phone number. He'd hoped to one day be worthy enough to stand beside her, not at her feet. What a stupid, stupid dream. Enzo's throat threatened to close. He had to force out his next words. But I can't be a chef and stay in Harmony Valley. You've proven that to me. By never once giving him more than a polite compliment of his talents. Enzo? Claudia's voice barely cleared the sound of sauce simmering on the stove. He walked to the door and out into the cold air. Enzo! She ran after him. What are you saying? What have I done? He turned. Look at me. I'm a cook. I don't have a fancy chef's jacket. He plucked at his white button-down shirt, the same one he wore to bus tables and wash dishes. I'm a cook. I haven't been to Paris. I'm just. He swallowed the sharp pain of dashed dreams. A cook. I don't understand. Claudia hugged herself. You're wonderful in the kitchen. You made something without me. I smelled the chorizo and chili sauce. The betrayal cut deeper than the jealousy over Slade wanting to do business with her. Claudia must have seen the hurt in his eyes because she reached for him. I was thinking about you this morning and I was inspired. He kept out of reach. You couldn't wait for me? I wanted to surprise you. No. Enzo shook his head, but he couldn't shake off the jealousy and the pain. We aren't equals. Don't you see? I come from beans and rice. I have a family that is large and embarrassing. We love food and loud music and dancing. Her hand fell to her side. We're equals. Really? Enzo choked on the word. Then why have you never crossed the street to eat in my restaurant? Why have you never asked to cook in my kitchen? Her face paled and then she darted back into pizza by the slice. Claudia ran away at Enzo's accusation, escaping to the kitchen of Pizza by the Slice. But she couldn't run away from the truth. Her chef's pride hadn't let her eat at his restaurant, hadn't let her ask to cook in his kitchen, hadn't let her give praise when she otherwise would have. She boiled spaghetti over a hot stove, but it didn't warm her. Enzo didn't want to cook with her anymore. She'd been certain he'd take one look at the Mexican-Italian spaghetti sauce she'd made and grin at her in that way of his that triggered the fast button in her pulse. She'd been certain he'd take her into his arms, tell her he'd reclaimed his man card, and kiss her. She'd even filled a small bag Nana had kept with chocolates to complete the tradition the right way. Instead, everything was wrong. Enzo wanted nothing to do with her, and Claudia couldn't get warm. Had she treated Enzo like a sous chef? Had she bossed him around? Had she discounted his ideas? She had. Oh, not like a complete chefzilla, but she'd definitely set boundaries, and he hadn't crossed them. He'd respected her. He'd never insisted they try a dish his way or that they kiss again. The cold inside her spread. The bell over the front door rang. Enzo? She ran into the dining room. Am I too late for lunch? A friend of mine recommended I come here. An older gentleman in a rumpled blue button-down and a pair of worn blue jeans stood in the foyer. He sniffed. I saw your specials listed outside. It doesn't smell like mushroom pizza and asparagus risotto. Claudia sniffed back the tears. She could smell a food critic at 100 paces. Why had he come now? What is that lovely smell? He asked, interest in his eyes. It's just. She'd been about to say spaghetti, but caught herself. That would be like saying it was just beans and rice. Enzo, she murmured, so full of regret. How was she ever going to make it up to him? Enzo was a chef. He knew how to blend different flavors. He knew what spaghetti lo curcio was. He knew how to choose fresh produce at the farmer's market. But nothing she could say would convince him of his talents now. He had to see it for himself. What did you say you were cooking? The man was scoping out the place, probably taking mental notes about the ambience. He'd use words like hole in the wall and cheap, but not about her food. Some of the cold was chased away by a feeling of confidence. Spaghetti alla Enzo is what you smell. Claudia straightened her chef's jacket. But it isn't being served today. This is actually a test kitchen for the restaurant across the street. If you wait a moment, I can take you over. It was quiet in El Rosal. The music had been turned down. Myra and some of Enzo's cousins sat at a corner booth flipping through magazines. Felipe and Arturo sat at the bar watching television. Junior was asleep in Arturo's lap. None of his family was aware of Enzo in the kitchen, his heart falling apart, his dreams drifting away. On autopilot, he took ingredients from the refrigerator. Ground beef. Tomatoes. Cheese. From the pantry, he brought herbs and corn tortillas. The kitchen door swung open. What are you doing? Grandma asked softly. You should be across the street. It's over. What is? The cooking? Your infatuation? Enzo was afraid it was everything. I just need to cook. He stared at his ingredients. What was he going to make? Tacos? With beans and rice? How filling. Claudia's voice. Inwardly, he cringed. Claudia had grown up making sauces with green herbs. He'd grown up in the world of red and brown spices. So different. No wonder Claudia looked down on his cooking. Not all the time, a small voice in his head argued. Exquisite, she'd once said of his mole. They always cooked what she was in the mood for. And her mood was gentle with hints of heat, but she also created a combination of dishes that balanced one another. Never the same side of beans and rice every day. What am I making? He didn't know. Enzo was angry and hurt, the emotions all but bursting through his veins. The front buzzer announced a customer. Family always came in the back. Enzo heard voices and footsteps. The music kicked up a notch. But it was a distant awareness because flavor combinations and ingredients tumbled through his head, demanding to be combined, cooked, and served on a plate. Enzo? Grandma's voice. He held up a hand, unwilling to interrupt the flow of ideas or the images that were beginning to form in his mind's eye. Heat first, subtlety second. Enzo? Claudia's voice. He turned, ideas and images falling to his feet like a shroud to hide the pieces of the heart she'd trampled on. Claudia still wore her chef's jacket, but she clutched her knife kit. May I assist you in the kitchen, chef? Chef? Arturo pushed through the swinging door in time to hear her, Junior in his arms. Yes, it's Chef. Grandma snapped Arturo with her dish towel. Show some respect. There's a man out there. Arturo moved a safe distance from Myra. He says he wants the chef's special. $1 tacos? Enzo couldn't take his eyes off Claudia. She was here? To assist him? What did that mean? He's asking for the chef to create something special, exclusively for him. Claudia laid her knife kit on the metal island counter and rolled it out as if her tools were as fragile as Enzo's heart. He's a food critic. Thank heavens you came, Arturo said, echoing Enzo's thoughts. I'm only here to help. Claudia raised her gaze to Enzo's. What's on the menu, chef? Chapter 9. The sun was setting when Claudia replayed the cell phone message a second time at Pizza by the Slice. We're intrigued by the idea of Mexican-Italian fusion, the restaurant owner said. Can you come out tomorrow and cook for us? This was it. Claudia's chance to redeem herself at a restaurant in San Francisco's south of Market District. She should feel excitement. Joy. Something other than betrayal at the thought of cooking Mexican-Italian without Enzo. The statue of David frowned at her from beneath his beret. She tugged it over his eyes. The restaurant doorbell chimed. Claudia didn't turn around. You left, Enzo said accusingly. Claudia didn't want to see Enzo's face, not unless he wore that grin, the one that invited her into the shadows and into his arms. Once the food was plated, I knew you'd be fine. He loved my Mexican-Italian pizza and your corn and tomato salad. He chuckled, a sound so deep that Claudia felt it reverberate in her hollow chest. He ate enough of my grandfather's homemade tortilla chips and my grandmother's salsa. I doubt he'll need to eat anything else for a week. Claudia removed her chef's jacket, but instead of hanging it on the door, she folded it up to take to her grandmother's. I bet that critic left feeling like he'd discovered a hidden treasure. His footsteps came closer. How do you know? Because your food fills the soul. It had filled hers. But Claudia couldn't smile up at Enzo. She was leaving. History hadn't repeated itself, but she felt just as broken-hearted as she had the last time she'd left town. I should have told you weeks ago, Enzo. But an old wound and her chef's pride had kept her from lavishing him with praise. That same stubborn pride kept her from facing him now and letting him see how hard she'd fallen for him. Your cooking is exquisite. It's more than just rice and beans. Enzo took her by the shoulders and slowly turned her around. There was no kiss-me grin on his face. It was as if he knew she was leaving him, knew how much harder it would be if their lips met once more. You've given me a gift, pizza girl. For weeks, here in this kitchen. And today, in mine. She shook her head. I gave you nothing. You're a chef. You were a chef before you ever shared my kitchen. She removed his hands from her shoulders. If he'd wanted to kiss her, he would have done so by now. It was only Claudia who longed for kisses. Enzo longed for something else entirely, validation. And now everyone will know of your talents, she told him. They'll drive for hours to experience one of your dishes. One good review and you'll be a hit. Slade will come to you with a business proposition. Enzo was exactly what Harmony Valley needed. Exactly what she needed. She hugged her chef's jacket tight to her chest. But Claudia wasn't what Enzo wanted. He wanted a chef's jacket more than he wanted her. Are you dumping me, pizza girl? Enzo had come to Claudia's restaurant walking on air. Now he felt deflated. I'm being realistic. I'm going into the city tomorrow for a job interview. Claudia glanced around the restaurant as if saying goodbye. And she had a death grip on her chef's jacket. Enzo frowned. You're going to cook for someone else? What did you expect me to do? Her gaze swept the walls, the floor, that silly statue of hers. Stay here? Yes. Enzo tossed his hands in the air, much as he'd seen his grandmother do all his life. You're happy here. But Enzo. There was pain in Claudia's voice. Pain in her dark eyes. Pain in the way she clutched that jacket. This is a pizzeria. It ceased being a pizzeria the day you reopened. He pointed to the collection of dented vintage brass cookware he'd helped her hang last weekend where the old plastic menu board used to be. If someone wanted pepperoni pizza, you told them they had to wait until you felt like making it. Fridays. She blinked watery eyes. I usually felt like making it on Fridays. Enzo took the jacket and set it aside. And then he cleaned her hands, mustering a small and desperate smile. You earned my respect. You mentored my dreams. You fed my soul. And then he whispered, how can you return to a life spent working for someone else? She gave a half-hearted shrug. I'm a chef. Chefs drift until they have their own place. Fear clutched his insides. Fear of losing her. Who says this can't be your place? Who says it isn't already? The people who told you rice and beans are filling? Generations of Giordanos. The generations including Blanca and your grandfather? They were happy feeding the population of Harmony Valley, just as my parents and grandparents have been. His voice lowered once more. Just as we could be. Claudia didn't seem to be breathing. Her eyes widened. Her cheeks paled. A tear tracked down her cheek. Stay with me. Here. Enzo squeezed her hands. In Harmony Valley. As what? She sounded weary, wiping her wet cheek on her shoulder. Your cooking buddy? Your competitor? Your assistant? As my wife. Enzo kissed one hand. As my lover. Enzo kissed the other. As my life. 2 chefs. 2 egos. Claudia shook her head, but there was longing in her eyes. Enzo had to think fast or she'd leave again. This time for good. My grandmother is in charge of breakfast at El Rosal. Arturo would love to take over midday operations. That would leave me to assist you here for lunch. And you to assist me there for dinner. As soon as the words were out, he knew that was the answer. For them. And for his family. You're asking for the stars to align. Claudia tried to tuck her hands free, tried to blink back more tears. But Enzo held on tight. Stars have done greater things. For love. You love me, don't you, pizza girl? She sighed. I fell in love with you a dozen years ago. And I fell in love with you again in this kitchen when I bossed you around. But that isn't the way love is supposed to be. Not in the long term, he allowed slowly, gathering his arsenal of arguments for her to stay. You didn't boss me as much as mentor me. And I love it when you tell me something new. And I love it when you listen to me. We found compromise here. In the joy of a shared creative passion. A feeling of happiness filled his chest because it was true. Let's do more than create dishes together. Let's create a life together. Claudia gave Enzo a hopeful half-smile. Filled with love and joy and laughter? He nodded. We'll cook what we want. He gathered Claudia in his arms and spun her around, the way he'd wanted to do the first day she'd returned to town. And we'll dance. Wait. I have something for my sweetheart. She grinned as she pulled open a drawer and handed him a red satin bag filled with heart-shaped chocolates. It was an old Harmony Valley tradition, giving your sweetheart a bag of sweets. But Enzo, before any of that, you really have to reclaim that man card and kiss me. Grateful for a do-over, he did what any man in the kitchen would do. He kissed the cook.